reach down and you put a hand into the water and you scoop it up towards you. Immediately the water starts leaking through your fingers until the hand is empty. That water is a man's life. From birth to death, it is always slipping through our hands until it is gone, along with all that you hold dear in this world.
I'm Luke, and what's the point anyway? I believe it's to follow the way, but let's see what others think. I hope you'll enjoy these conversations as we explore this question together. Welcome back to What's the Point Anyway? My guest today from St. Louis, Missouri is Steve Magua. He's a pastor and a prolific content creator, and he's got some really awesome stuff. I've loved following him. He reached out to me and was keen to come on the show. He's a good friend of Tim Martin and some other guests that I've had. So I'm really interested in hearing his story and his perspective. So Steve, what's the point anyway?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Luke, for inviting me. And I believe that the point of all of it is the glory of God. I believe that God created a universe in which he wants to glorify himself, to manifest and to show his glory. And so the goal of everything is the display of the glory of God, top of which, of course, is love, but also all the other aspects of the glory of God, which means righteousness, holiness, justice, mercy. So I believe that the world and everything in it and our lives are about the glory of God.
Nice one. So I've only come across you maybe over the last year and a half, Steve. And you put out a lot of content, and you hold similar position to Tim Martin around covenant creation, and a lot of your critics will give you maybe a straw man argument saying that, you don't believe God created all things. I think you've pretty clearly answered that.
Absolutely. I don't know where they get that idea, because definitely, if you listen to within 5 minutes or any minutes that you listen to what we teach, we definitely believe that everything was created by the one true God of the Bible, everything visible, everything invisible. He is the creator. He is the supreme God. He is sovereign. So it's all about God in the end.
Yeah. So what's been really interesting with you, Steve, is I listen to a lot of your content. It sounds like you're so knowledgeable and so well read and well studied on some of these things that I just assumed you must have held these positions you had for decades. And then I learned recently that it was only recently that you've sort of had this change. And then I was watching some of the videos on your YouTube channel from, a decade or so ago, and you were preaching all about the end times and who the Antichrist was. So how has that, when you give that initial answer about what the point is, and it is to the glory of God and its holiness, its righteousness, how has your understanding of what that's meant changed over time, particularly with your new understanding and new way of seeing different doctrines?
To be honest with you, I don't think that particular point has changed.
Yeah, interesting.
As far as I can remember, when I first came to believe, which was back in 2007, this was the thing that was impressed upon my heart the most, is that God desires to reveal himself. God desires for people to know him as he is, which means that everything has to do with the glory of God. And so that idea of, the love of God, the righteousness of God, the holiness of God, that has always been very, very central to me. So therefore, even coming into a very, very different point of view, which I would say a radical change in my view of eschatology, in my view of what God did in the past, it was in the search of that question. Because I remember back in 2017, 2018, we were doing these Bible studies, and we would discover things that are different from what we had learned.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember praying for a particular period of time and saying, God, if there is anything that is wrong in the way that I see you, or that I see your plan, or that I read the Bible, I am willing that you would destroy it all and bring it back to zero, and you would bring me back, because I don't want to continue to do something for 30, 40 years and then come to find out it was just utterly not what you intended. Because for me, it's about you, it's about your glory. And so when I discovered that Jesus already returned in 70 AD, but in 2019, which was 10 years into my ministry, 10 years into my, or maybe about 12 years into my Christianity.
Yeah.
It blew my mind. It shocked me. It even frustrated me. But at the end of the day, in my mind, I was like, okay, if this is what it's about, if this is how you reveal your glory, fine. I'm willing to go through it. I'm willing to go back to zero.
I praise you for your willingness to change positions. I think it's a trait that I desire to have, and it's something that I really respect in people, that when you can hold a view so strong and then be willing to shift from that, takes a huge amount of humility, and I think a lot of people don't have it. I'd be interested, Steve, you preach and you speak with a high degree of conviction in your views, which is great, but you've shown you're willing to change your views. Right now, at this point in time, what are some things, and you know, I know I've seen you recently type that, you know, if I'm wrong on this, then I'll admit that I'm wrong on it. What are some of the things, I mean, when we speak about the Bible, what are views that you have that are as close to set as possible, and what are some things that you could still see yourself changing on?
All right. Now, there's some things that I believe that will not change. First of all, I believe that God is going to remain being God, the God of the Bible.
Yeah.
Yahweh, to me, I just don't see how that can change.
Yeah.
And I do investigate it. In other words, I do listen to other ideas, you know, from atheists or agnostics. I just have not had any evidence that has been provided for me to think. Now, there might come a time when I might say there is no God, or there is, or maybe I don't know who God is.
Yeah.
That I don't think is going to change. Also, the deity of Jesus Christ. To me,
Yeah.
as far as I've studied it, as far as I've listened to other people, I'm fully and totally convinced that Jesus Christ is God. I believe that the nature of God revealed in the Bible is that He is a triune God. There is the Father, there is the Son, and there is the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And I know that this is a deep mystery, but for me, that is very well set. Also, the fact that the first coming and the second coming of Christ are in our past. Now, that to me has become as clear as water. That is a foregone conclusion. I think the last one that I'll say is that the love of God. I believe that God is a God of love, and He desires to show His love to all humanity.
Yeah.
And I believe that is why we are here, and I believe that's what is going to continue to be the goal and the thrust of the ministry of God amongst humanity.
Yeah. Interesting. Could you, if someone said to you in, I think I watched a video 2012, and you were talking about, I mean, you were disproving it, but you were saying, yeah, that people are saying that Barack Obama could be the Antichrist, and you were saying how, no, these are the criteria that need to be for the Antichrist, and therefore it can't be Barack Obama. And good one,
I can't even remember that. Wow.
And you were correct on it, so I think we've got to give you credit for that one. What would have you said if someone said to you like 10 years ago, hey, Steve, you know, in 2025, you're going to say that the first and second comings were past, all prophecies being fulfilled? Like how, because I've got people that listen to this show that are Christian and plenty that are non-Christian as well, but I'm trying to show the weight of how radical a change of worldview that would have been for you hearing that back then.
Oh, I can assure you, if someone suggested that, I will probably get into fisticuffs, because that to me was so central to my doctrine that Jesus Christ is God. He came into this world. He died on the cross. He rose up on the third day, and He's coming again soon within my lifetime. I was convinced in 2012 that Jesus Christ was coming within my lifetime.
Yeah.
in fact, I was convinced 2050 would not come before Jesus returned. In fact, at that point, I think 2018 was really the cutoff point for me, because
Right.
it was,
Okay.
it was all about, because I was a Zionist, and I
Yeah.
was deep into Zionism. So Israel was
In
the
terms of
time clock of God.
yeah.
If you
Okay. So
listen to any of those stuff,
you were pro-Zionist.
I was pro-Zionist. I was
Yeah.
Israel. Israel is gonna be 70 in 2018,
Yeah.
and that's when Jesus has to have come back by. So no
Yeah.
question about it. So
Yeah.
that would have been too much for me to even conceptualize. I don't think I would have accepted it in any way.
Can you give? I had a guest on recently. I was saying I can get easily every preterist. I'm happy to reach out, or is happy to come on the show and chat with me. I've had atheists, I've had New Agers, I've had Satanists,
Mm.
I've had what else have I had? Stoics, but I cannot get a futurist Christian to come on and have a chat with me. So
Interesting.
in lieu of that, can you give a bit of an overview of Steve Magua in the mid 2010s, explaining the worldview for that futurist? So you were thinking that the world's going to end in 2018.
I really didn't think that the world was going to end immediately, because
Yeah,
I was at that point I was a premillennial dispensationalist, right?
yeah,
Pre-trib. So what I believed was going to happen was that Jesus was going to bolt out of heaven in an actual physical white horse,
yeah,
and that we were going to see him in the physical clouds. We were all going to hear the trumpet, and I had it all figured out, from what I was listening to and what I believed.
yeah,
Everybody was going to see him, because now we had all the technology. Everybody has a phone.
yeah,
Everybody has the ability to see a video of Jesus as he comes, no matter which part of the globe you are in. And
yeah,
so once he came, first thing would happen is that he would snatch the church, which of course I was part of,
yeah,
out of the world for 7 years. And then for 7 years, it would be hell on earth,
yeah,
upon which then the second coming would take place. We would come back and live with Jesus reigning from Jerusalem for 1,000 chronological years.
yeah,
And then after the 1,000 years, the world would actually literally end. Jesus would somehow take us off of the world, destroy it, remake it, a new
yeah,
universe, a new galaxy, then would come back here into an earth that did not have any waters or oceans, since we would not need water or oceans or any of that stuff. So even then I was saying, I would tell people, the world is not actually literally going to end in 7 years or in 10 years, but everything we know is going to change. But the world as we know it, the planet, is going to disappear after 1,000 years after the second.
yeah. And so once you're taken in that rapture, what's happening in the 7 years after that
On earth or for us?
on Earth?
Okay. So first of all, on earth, those who would remain, it would be the worst time ever, because
Mm-hmm.
the Antichrist would then be revealed. After that, at first he would come in with a peace plan, but within 3.5 years, all hell would break loose. People would suffer grievously on earth for not believing in Jesus Christ and for not believing in the pre-trib, setup. And then the judgment would begin at the end of the 7 years, and Jesus Christ would come and judge every man on earth, so that everyone that had not believed would be judged and cast into the lake of fire.
Mm-hmm.
And those Christians who had been left behind, because I did believe in the left behind,
Yeah,
system, those who had been left behind, they would be saved, but they would be saved like, it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, as being snatched out of the fire.
yeah,
Then now, after the 7 years at the second coming, now we would get into a situation where there would be peace on earth, Jesus Christ reigning on the earth. There was I was not quite sure what would happen there, because it seemed to me that there would be people left alive
yeah,
that Jesus would rule over, because the final judgment would happen after the 1,000 years.
yeah, yeah,
Somewhere around 2014, 2015, after having some conversations with my mother and a friend of mine called Lillian, I began to reconsider whether the pre-tribulation idea was accurate.
yeah,
And after studying it again, I became convinced that I was wrong in that. So I changed my position from being pre-tribulation to being post-tribulation. So from
Yeah.
about 2014, maybe 2015, I began to believe that no, we are going to go through the tribulation. There is no 7-year period where we are taken out of the world,
Yeah.
but rather we would go through the whole horror system that Jesus Christ would appear at the last moment, rescue us. We would be snatched up for a moment, and then he would do the judgment. Then we would come back and then now reign with him for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So the 1,000 years was always after the second time.
Yeah. And I mean, as you say, that's a fairly significant, from pre-trib to post-trib, as you say,
Yes.
is really everyone's timing around where they get snatched away during that 7 years of final sort of hell on earth.
Yes.
Now, the scary thing is this is the position of, I don't know, 50, 60, 70% of Christians around the world. Even though you've just described, and I think people listening saying they know you don't hold this now, but they're like, hang on, but would be the view of a completely mad person.
Right.
What do you think it does for worldview and output and how people live when they think that that's just on the horizon?
Well, I can tell you what it did to me.
Yeah.
First of all, my view of life was very, very pessimistic, very dark. First of all, I kept asking myself, what is the point of going to school? What is the point of investing? What is the point of paying my bills?
Yeah.
It's all going to burn anyway. It's all going to burn soon, right? And so really stopped. I have 8 children, but I honestly, I would tell them all the time, guys, it's not even going to get to your lifetime. You guys are not going to possibly grow to be adults. So I was not investing for their future. I was not even teaching them to prepare for the far future. I was telling them we all need to prepare for the tribulation. We all need to prepare for the beheadings. And especially if you remember the time of the ISIS, when ISIS was beheading people, I was like, this is it. This is it, guys. You see, my children, because we've talked about this, they lived in fear.
Yeah.
I lived in fear myself, even though I on the face, it would seem as if I was very courageous.
Yeah.
Can't wait to die for Christ. But I was terrified every night, every day, because it could be the day that it all begins. We are all going to suffer grievously. And so my worldview became very closed.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I also began to categorize people and characterize people. If they didn't believe what we believed, then how stupid they were, how foolish they were. They're not even preparing. The world is about to end, and look at them living as if it's Sodom and Gomorrah. Look at them living as if it's Noah's time. And so even my view of people, now that I look back at it, I was like, there was very little love.
Yeah.
Because I felt like a prophet of doom, trying to tell people it's about to end and you guys are asleep and you need to get out of your stupor and out of your slumber.
Yeah.
And so there was very little love in it.
Yeah.
And that's what I see now, even for people who have that view, is that because they are so consumed by the fact that the world is about to end.
Yeah.
And there is a part of them, there's a part of me anyway that wanted it to be so. I wanted, come on, start it, burn, destroy, because that's what's going to lead us to the point where we get glory. We get to the point where we get to heaven. We get to the good part.
And do you think, was there almost like a bit of a, I know this was the case for me, a little bit of a sort of narcissistic element of it too, that thinking you are part of this special group that are going to go through this, and you're almost like the hero in the movie.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's why I loved the movies about the left behind and the tribulation saints and everything. I loved it because I was like, finally. And I would preach it. If you listen to my messages, I would preach it, but that God is going to give us this special grace. We are going to be the shining heroes. We are going to be the ones that are going to show the world that they were wrong. And, I would read Revelation because I at that point, I had been taught to read myself into the Bible in almost every way. You know, I see Jesus and everything. So I would see myself in Revelation 2 where they come and they kneel down before us and they admit we were right and they were wrong. And I would even tell people, like, if somebody argued with me and say, okay, see you soon. We'll see. But let's see how you feel about it once it starts happening. You think so. It was very narcissistic in my view.
Yeah.
And of course I regret, having even such a view, but that's the view I was raised in, and that's the view that I adopted and that I took up and said, this is mine.
Yeah. So when did that flip? When did the penny drop, and what led you right out of that into something completely different?
Well, like I said, I've always had this ministry, especially from about 2014, 2015. That's when the change really began to happen, when that flip from pre-tribulation to post-tribulation began.
Yeah.
Because once that happened, because that was such a radical shift for me,
yeah,
I was like, what else could I be wrong in?
Yeah.
If I was so wrong, and because before that, you see, I grew up at least in my adult life, as a charismatic Christian.
Yeah.
And as a charismatic Christian, you led by the Spirit.
Yeah.
And so when you pray and you fast and you open your Bible, the Spirit gives you clarity of what the passage means, right? So this is how I studied the Bible. So, and I was convinced that the Spirit had led me to believe in the pre-tribulation. But now, about 2014, 2015, I began to say, I think there is a great part of it that he definitely, God leads us, but I think he allows us to grow at our own speed or with the capacity that we have of thought and diligence in study. So I began to change even my thought about how do I study. So I began to look at people in the Reformed doctrine, people like John MacArthur, John Piper, or even the old guys like Jonathan Edwards and Charles Spurgeon. I began to say, what was different about them? How did they look at the Bible differently?
Yeah.
And so that's the first time I came into the issue of hermeneutics.
Yeah.
And understanding that there is a proper way to actually look at the text and there is an improper way to look at the text. So gradually, I began to incorporate this into my studies and into my teaching. You will notice if you look at my progression in my videos that now I begin to speak about exegesis and eisegesis and exposition and looking at the text and the historical grammatical method.
Yeah.
And so at the same time, I'm praying deeply as a charismatic. I'm praying all the time. And I remember, like I said, 2017, 2018, we had a time of prayer and fasting. And so much was changing. And I said, God, I'm appreciative of doing the piecemeal thing, but I don't want to spend too many years being on the totally wrong side. So help me see where I'm really wrong.
Yeah.
And I forgot about that prayer. So for about 2 years, I was just kind of in the same place, still expecting the second coming was going to happen shortly.
Yeah.
The tribulation was about to start. Then in 2019, December, I can't remember exactly what I was doing, but I was watching this guy, and he had a video called the Jesus Trip.
Yeah.
And he was just speaking about different views. And he said, and then there are these people who are claiming that Jesus already came back. And that is just crazy.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, that's crazy. How would even anybody think about that? So it was just speaking about different views on Christianity.
Yeah.
And when he said that, I was like, who would even think that? That is
crazy.
I mean, Jesus is about to come back.
Yeah.
But because I was on that place where I was willing to re-examine or to at least examine whatever other Christians were saying, I noted in my mind, I said, after I listened to this guy, I am going to check out these people that he's saying are saying Jesus already came back. I'd never heard of preterism until that point.
Yeah.
For some reason. Even in my studies in systematic theology, they just never gave it any space of time.
Yeah.
So that's the first time I hear about it. So after the video, I went and, because he had mentioned Don Preston, I went and looked up Don Preston to see what is this ridiculous, foolish man saying. And so I listened to him the first time and I was like, man, that is so stupid. And I looked at him and I can remember saying to myself, wow, he is a doctor of theology. He's a Dr. Don Preston, and he is just so clueless. He just doesn't know what he's speaking about. So, but I said, I'm going to take 5 minutes. I'm going to prove this guy wrong in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
so I sit down with my notebook to disprove him. And he's going through Matthew 10. And I look
Yeah.
at it and I had a double take. I was like,
Mhm.
whoa,
Does it really say that?
does it read? And I'm like, how many times have I read that verse? It really says that. But I was like,
Yeah.
oh, but it cannot mean that.
Yeah,
Then he goes
yeah,
to
yeah.
Matthew 16. And as he's going through it, I begin to say, oh my goodness, how come I've never seen all these verses?
Yeah.
That was the first time I'd seen those verses.
Yeah,
Felt
yeah,
what
yeah.
they were
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
So that's where the flip really happened for me. But I didn't immediately embrace it. I was really, really frustrated that these guys were bringing up verses
Mhm.
that, to me, it seemed as if they were inserting verses into my Bible.
Yeah.
So it took me maybe 2 or 3 months before I really began to consider that this could be the correct position.
And so all that's the other funny thing about this is all that's happening as COVID starts to hit.
Yes.
So that was, I mean, COVID was your end times.
Now, interestingly, if I had not come to understand this,
Yeah.
COVID would have been the correct, the right place for me to say, look at it now, it's starting, right?
Yeah.
But because this happened just before COVID
Just
began, that's when I
before.
came to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Now I was in a big turmoil, but I began to consider that maybe COVID has nothing to do with the end times.
Mhm.
And so for me, COVID was never, this is the end times, because that was the time that I was now investigating it, looking into it, listening to different people, listening to Gary DeMar,
Yeah.
listening to the Bible Answer Man, listening to Ken Gentry, Don Preston, Ed Stevens. So I was listening to all these guys, and I could see that what they were saying disturbed me, but they were being very faithful to what I had come to see as the proper way of approaching the text. They were using exegesis. They were allowing the text to speak for itself. They were not imposing themselves on the text. And so for me, COVID time, I will always associate it with the time that, like, the lights turned on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's when I really began to see the Bible the way I believe it should be seen.
Yeah. What was that like, Steve, with with your wife and 8 kids? So they've your kids had only ever really experienced you as sort of a doomsdayer that thought the world was ending. Did they think initially you were going mad, or was it a relief for them? Did it take time? Is it still taking time?
Now, for first of all, for my wife, it surprised me because when I discovered it, I didn't say anything to anybody. I was looking into it for about 2 weeks. I was very, very angry
Mm-hmm.
at God. I was very angry at all my past teachers. I was angry at myself, and I thought I was going crazy. Honestly,
Yeah.
I thought I was going crazy. This cannot be. This cannot be. But eventually, when I got ready to speak with it, I spoke to my wife first. I said, "Listen, I've discovered some things that are so radical. I want to hear what you have to think about it." So I began to show her what I was discovering. And the first thing she told me, Steve, to be honest with you, I've always asked myself about these things.
Right.
I said, what? But you've sat under my teaching. You've never asked a question. And we've had this open forum. She said, no, it was too radical for me to ask. And I thought, you have to know better. And all the other people, nobody has ever said anything about it. So for her, she was like, yeah, I always ask myself about these things. And now that you're saying that, it's so clear that that's what they're saying.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
for her, it was really not a struggle.
Yeah.
So, and that really helped me because I was like, okay, then I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
Because if you've been asking yourself this, so she was very supportive about it. But when I started to veer off into Israel only, because that's almost always what happens at first, is you listen to all these guys, then you find an Israel only guy, then he
Yeah.
begins to convince you, hey, all Christianity ended, everything was fulfilled, God is gone away, he has nothing to do with mankind.
Yeah.
Now that's where she was like, that one, I can tell you that direction, I can see that's not it.
Yeah.
So that helped me to come off the brink. But my children, when we sat down and I began to show them these things, they began to say, wow, that's like a weight taken off us. They were happy about it. They were like, wow.
Yeah.
Because we began to, at that time, we also began to re-examine things about hell.
Yeah.
Had been very, very heavy. Futurism and hell kind of go together.
Go hand in hand. Yeah.
They go hand in hand. And so once we began to relook at that and to actually see what the text says, it seemed to me like the kids, because they were not yet fully invested
Mm.
And I think the kids, their minds are easily, you can change, they can change easier than us.
Yeah.
So for them, they were like, wow, this sounds more like what the Bible is saying.
Yeah.
That's on the face of it, that's what the Bible is saying, rather than what you guys were saying before.
Yeah.
And so I think for my wife and kids, it was a much easier transition than it was for me. Because
Yeah.
for me, I think it was a deeper investment and a greater emotional thing for me. I was like, oh God, I felt as if I was losing my faith.
Yeah. Have you got a theory? I actually posted something in a Facebook group about this today, and it was funny. I had some of these Facebook groups are really strange how people sort of just argue with each other all the time. But some of the, sort of, what I was saying was, I mean, I hold a really similar view to you around what the scriptures are saying. And I look at it, I'm like, it's really clear. Like, it's not like it's some complicated system. It's just like, I think if you got the average non-believer to pick up a Bible, they've never heard anything before, and like, what is this saying? Is this talking about something far distant future, or is it imminent, at that time? I think most would read similar things to what we're saying. And so I pose the question today. I'm like, do we really think it's taken 1950 years for people to work this out? Or have you got a theory on what's happened over time? Have people worked it out periodically over that period of time, and just those records and writings have been scrapped? Or for one reason or another, has the teaching around future and hell just blinded people to it?
I think that a long time there have been significant people who figured it out. And we can see it in the early church fathers. We can see it in people like Athanasius. We can see it in people like Eusebius. I think they figured it out. They understood that what was supposed to happen happened. However, at the very same time, and I think this has been the pattern of humankind, is that there are always people who are in control of how much information people get.
Yeah.
I think that has been there from the beginning. And I think that the people in power are always interested in what is the best information that we need to get out there so that we can control the people.
Yeah.
And so I think that there has been suppression of those people who would come out and figure it out. And because the first time when you really figure it out, you usually go to the authorities and say, hey guys, I've just discovered this. And they would look at it and they'll be like, do we really want people believing this? If people believe this, how controllable will they be? Because if you look at the history of the church, whether it's the Roman Catholic Church, whether it's even the Reformed Church or the Pentecostal Church, even within the church circles, there is always this tendency to want to control the information that people have, because you don't want people to have too much freedom. You don't want people to have choices. You want them to be afraid. You want them to be dependent on you as the leadership. And so I think that along the way, it's not that people didn't figure it out. I think that those who figured it out were suppressed.
Yeah.
And I think that whenever we have a person who they cannot suppress, that's just the grace of God. See, for instance, like a Martin Luther, I believe that the organized church tried to suppress what he was saying because it was going to be too much of a change. But I think the grace of God was more than sufficient to make sure that what he discovered came out and became the norm. And so I think there are two things working. So there is the manipulation of humans, but also I think that there is the plan of God to where God allows ideas to come forth when they are ready, when people are ready to receive them.
Yeah.
So, like how it says in the fullness of time, God sent his son.
Yeah.
In other words, I think if Jesus, let's say, had been born 400 years before his time,
Would have been too early.
It would have been too early. So in the same way, I think that people have to have been mature enough just as a people to be able to receive it. And so that's why we see the changes happening almost every 500 years.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it did not become mainstream earlier on. Because I think it was just not yet time. The people are not yet ready.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the church as a body and humanity needs to go on the journey.
Yes.
And what's the Bible say about our life is but a vapor? It is.
Yes.
70 70, 80 years on average, but that's small in terms of the timeline of human history and church history as well.
I believe so. I believe so.
Steve, you mentioned Israel only. One of my most recent guests was Jen Fishburne, who was an ex-Israel only, now atheist, former Christian. What led you, when you started looking at Israel only? So we covered that. So any sort of listeners of this episode will have heard a little bit of that. What led you to say that no, Israel only can't be true?
See, at first when I started looking at it, the Israel only people focus on the verses that show that Jesus only came for Israel. Mm-hmm. God was only dealing with Israel. God gave the law only to Israel. And very appealing. And it seemed to me that all the passages that had to do with the return of Jesus had to do with gathering Israel back to God.
Yeah.
But then, thank God, I had already had a long foundation of studying the Bible. And I had already seen and I already knew from the beginning that Adam was not an Israelite.
Yeah.
The patriarchs were not Israelite. Noah was not an Israelite. And especially with Noah, because that had been a very interesting topic for me before I even came into all this. Noah was the progenitor of most of the people that live in the Middle East and North Africa.
Yeah.
So, like, for instance, Ham was the father of Egypt and Libya and Assyria and all these people. Then you have Shem and Japheth. And so I already knew that when God made a covenant with Noah, and it said it's an everlasting covenant, it was with Noah and all his sons.
Yeah.
And all his sons did not all lead to Israel. In fact, Israel comes from only one branch, which is Shem, which goes through one man, Abraham. It seemed to me that all these other people were also part of God's plan.
Yeah.
You see passages, I think it's Isaiah 19 or Isaiah 18, where he says that at the time when I do this, Israel and Assyria and Egypt will become united and they will all come and worship me.
Yeah.
And so such passages, he would talk about how he gave I remember actually early on, I watched a video by Tim Martin, and this is how I actually came to know about Tim Martin.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the promised land of Lot. So
Yeah.
And he gave so much evidence that God had made promises and covenants with Gentile nations, which were not Israel. He had made covenants with Moabites to give them promised land. He had made covenants with Sidon and Tyre. And so I think I only dabbled and listened to the Israel only and considered it to have any value for maybe a week and a half.
Yeah.
But when I considered all these other passages, and I could tell that from the beginning, from Genesis, God's view or God's goal was to reach all of humanity, not just Israelites.
Yeah.
So all the other passages that talk about the other people that are not Israelites and God's plan to save them, God's plan to bless them, that's what helped me to come out of that idea. And of course, when I came into covenant creation, which I'm sure we'll mention as we go, now that helped me to have a proper world view of not only the peoples that lived in the Bible, but also what that had to do with the people that now live on the planet, apart from the people that lived in the Bible.
Yeah. Do you want to, any Christian and any preterist and anyone that knows you is going to know very clearly what covenant creation is. Maybe for someone that's never heard of it before, can you give us an explanation of it?
Yes, absolutely. Now, covenant creation is the understanding that, first of all, God is a God of covenants and God deals with human beings through covenants. And we have two main covenants. We have the Old Covenant and we have the New Covenant. And that in Genesis chapter 1, what is happening there is an establishment of a covenant with a people that already existed in the world. And the way that one actually comes to understand covenant creation the best is, first of all, by understanding the end of the Old Covenant at the second coming of Christ. So in other words, the best pathway is, first of all, for somebody to understand preterism. That Jesus Christ returned in our past and that the Old Covenant world passed away in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed and when the sacrificial system was brought to an end. And so once I understand that, then I have to ask, if the first heaven and the first earth of Revelation 21 passed away and the sea is no more, when did that first heaven and first earth and sea get created? And of course, naturally, you have to go back to Genesis 1, because that's where you see heaven, earth, and sea being established first. So covenant creation shows or explains that in the beginning, in Genesis 1, it is not a material creation that is being described, but a covenant creation. In other words, Genesis is using the same allegorical and metaphoric and symbolic protocols as in Revelation, so that heaven and earth and sea are not space and physical earth and oceans, but rather those are symbols that describe the different categories of people that God got into covenant with. And so therefore, we are not looking for a material creation at Genesis. We are looking at a covenant creation, the establishment of a relationship between God and people. Dr. John Walton, who is not a covenant creationist, has what is called a functional creation view. And what he says, which is very similar, is that at Genesis, all that is happening is that God is reorganizing people who already exist in order for them to establish a system of worship and a system of relationship with him. But it is not the creation of the physical world that is happening there.
If you possessed a time machine and you could jump in it and you can go back to the time where the first 3 chapters of Genesis is happening, what are you looking at and what are you experiencing?
I think what is happening, first of all, you have a very ancient, civilization of people. The Sumerians, the Akkadians, the people of Mesopotamia. And I believe that they are living life as we imagine it. They are living. Now, I think that they, at least at the time of Genesis, they have developed into cities. They have developed into very organized communities. However, they have no knowledge of God. They have no knowledge of how the world came to be, what the world is about. They have no knowledge of anything that we know about God today. And I believe that it is at this point, and I think that there's many religions at that point. I think
I was going to ask that. There's stories of gods.
They have many stories of gods. They have many ideas, many theories of who controls what. They think that thunderstorms are gods. They think that the oceans are gods. Anything that they cannot understand must be some god or some being that is controlling the world. And I believe that at that time, that's when God considers that humanity is ready to begin to receive the information about who he is and what he did. And I believe that he chooses a people within the Middle East, amongst the Sumerians, or amongst the Mesopotamians, and he begins to reveal himself to them using language they're already used to, using communication that they are already using. And so that's why when we look at the creation story, and we look at, let's say, for instance, even the creation stories of other peoples around there, the Egyptians or the Sumerians, they are very similar. They are all speaking pretty much the same language, just different variations. And they are using a lot of metaphor as was common to them. I think that's what's happening in that time of history.
And do you think, so when we talk about like Adam and Eve, and then we'll have to get to the serpent, is Adam a singular man? Is Eve a singular woman? Or are they metaphors for peoples?
I think that in Genesis 1, Adam is a population.
I
believe Adam is like the way you would say God decided he's going to deal with Israel, or God as a nation, as a people, right? Because that's what's presented there. He said, let us make mankind, because the first usage of the word Adam is not a proper noun. It's just a descriptive word of a people. He made man in his own image. And then he says them. He made them male and female. He made them. I think it's a general population, which God is now going to begin revealing himself to. But when you get to Genesis 2, I believe that there is a specific man and a specific woman who, it may be that their names are actually Adam and Eve, because we do see in other cultures, I think, for instance, it is I believe it's the Assyrians who have Adapa. I believe the Akkadians have Adamu. So they are these historical figures, even in the ancient Near East writings, that have very similar names to Adam. So there was a man whose name is Adam, but he comes out of the population of the people group called the Adamites.
Yeah. And then what's so when God starts to reveal himself to this man and woman, Eve, what then happens with the great fall of mankind, which is Genesis 3, where the serpent comes into the garden and tempts them? What do you think, what are we in that time machine? What do you think we're watching happen there?
I think what we're watching happen is this. So we have the people group called Adam, and they all live somewhere in the Middle East around,
Modern day
Persia,
Iraq,
Saudi Arabia, around there.
Yeah.
And I think that amongst these people, Adam is the person who is carved out by God to be the first priest. So I believe that Adam is at the temple. He has an actual temple. There's even excavations that they've done that are about 4800 BC. And they have found a small temple with an altar with burnt offerings that is actually as old as what the Bible says.
Yeah.
And I believe that he's at the temple with his wife. They're the ones who are serving as the first stewards of the first temple. But they also have other people within that community that are with them, being the guides of people spiritually.
Yeah.
And so what I believe is that amongst them, there is another person who is within their service, who is a close confidant of Adam and Eve. And as they are grappling with how to fashion this new faith, this new religion in which they are guiding the people into God's knowledge, I believe that the serpent, being another human being, gives very bad advice, very bad counsel. He misleads Adam and Eve into contradicting what God is revealing to them, because I believe that God is revealing to himself to them supernaturally through visions and dreams. And so he misleads them away from the path, by promising them, hey, if we dabble into this, we'll get into deeper knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm seeing in Genesis, is that the serpent is a human being.
Yeah.
Just as Adam is a human being, just as Eve is a human being. And we know this, at least the way that I see it, is that in that culture, in the ancient Near East, often, and especially in religious circles, people are described as animals often.
Yeah.
So you have kings being described as lions or mighty monsters and so on and so forth. And so in their telling of the story, they assign to the man who misled them the image of a serpent, because even then, snakes, serpents, reptiles would have been considered to be very, very sneaky, to be very deceptive, because they slither. And so, because remember, the story is being written afterwards. It's not being written in real time. I believe that Adam records what happened in the temple text after it has happened. How did we fall out with God? What happened? Why did we get into this chaos that we are in? So he's recording in tablets. So that's another thing that I do believe that Adam actually wrote at the early parts of Genesis. So I do believe that the serpent was a human being. We are told in Genesis 3 that he was one of the creatures that God made in the garden that was to serve together with the men.
Yeah. Interesting. While we're on the topic of creation, maybe we can circle back a long way to your early upbringing, because I know you mentioned early on that you became Christian in the early 2000s. So you obviously didn't grow up Christian, and you grew up in the foreign land of Kenya. So tell us, what's it like growing up in Kenya, and what's your worldview there? And then what do they think about creation?
Right. Now, let me say this. When I say that I became a Christian in 2007, that might sound a little bit deceptive, because in Kenya, generally, Kenya is a very, very, very Christian country. At least when I'm growing up. We had been colonized by the British. And of course, eventually, we became a Christian majority nation. So when I'm born, my parents are very committed Christians. They're going to church. We're going to Sunday school every Sunday. And it is one of those things that even when we grow up into teenagers, you either go to church or you don't live in my house. Even if you don't believe. So and we are learning Christian religious education as a subject that is required, just like mathematics or
Yeah.
English or geography. So all the way up to the last year of high school, you're learning CRE, which is Christian Religious Education. So we were very inundated with the Bible. We knew the Bible.
Yeah.
But what I mean, I became a Christian is that this is the first time that my eyes were open and my heart was open to believe in God personally, to
Yeah.
begin seeking Him, to begin serving Him. So I grew up in a very, very, very deeply Christian culture. So we believed in the Bible to be the fundamental truth of the world. So you go to most Kenyans, you ask them, do you believe the world was created 6,000 years ago? Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Is somebody suggesting any different?
Yeah.
Do you believe that Jesus is the only God? Of course. I mean, who else could there be? So for most Kenyans, 80% of Kenyans consider themselves to be Christians, even if they don't go to church.
Yeah.
So, but of course, in my teenage years, especially when I turned 17 or 18, I began to explore other religions, other viewpoints, and for a period of time there, I became an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't feel that I wanted to commit myself or submit myself to the worship of God. So from about 17 or 18 until I was about 33, I did not go to church. I did not pursue anything to do with God. So it was not until I was married for 5 years that I came into a crisis point in my life that now I felt I need help. My marriage was breaking apart. My life was in tatters. And so that's the first time that I prayed to God. I said, God, if you exist, I need help. I need you to reveal yourself to me. And I believe that's the first time that I really come into a place where I sense God speaking to me. I feel God pulling me toward Himself, and I begin to have a desire to know more about Him. So that's in 2007. But generally, I grew up believing that what the Bible says, or at least what I was told the Bible says, the world was created 6,000 years ago. There is a place
very
called
literal.
hell that I'm soon going to go and burn forever and ever. All that was part of the basic beliefs. But my parents were also doctors. My father is a general practitioner. My mother is a dentist. So they were scientists.
Yeah.
And so when I went into high school and we began to learn other things in science, about the age of the world and evolution and all this stuff, I would come home and it confused me because I was like, okay, Mom or Dad, I need you to explain to me. You are Christians, but you're also scientists. Are you saying you don't believe in Homo sapiens or Homo erectus or, and Kenya is one of those places where they say early men is supposed to have been.
Yeah.
And so we would have these discussions, and now my parents would begin to say, we are Christians, yes. And so my mother was very fundamental. She'd be like, yep, whatever the Bible says is what it says. But at the same time, she would say, but if it was to be discovered that what scientists are saying is true, it would still not change because God would be the one that arranged it.
Yeah.
Like that. So I began to have this dual view that science could be right, but the Bible must always be right.
Yeah.
So I was not really settled on that question for a long time. And I don't know that I am truly, truly, truly settled. But at least for now, I know for a fact that God did do something 6,000, 7,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But now I know it was not the material creation.
Yeah.
So now I'm more willing to see. So there was this thing that had been happening for millions of years. But at the right time, God enters into humanity and reveals His plan, His covenant plan, His plan for redemption about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was chatting with a friend today. I don't know if you listened to it, but Mel Gibson, the actor, was on Joe Rogan.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've not listened to the latest, but I am familiar with that.
Yeah. It was I mean, I think Mel's got terrible theology, but I think he's a genuine believer, and it was an entertaining listen. That they were talking about, Rogan was talking about Homo erectus and all the other different humans, and Mel Gibson obviously, I think, holds this fairly sort of fundamentalist view, and he's just sort of like, I don't really believe any of that. But he's like, I don't really buy what they're selling on it. But what I was saying to my friend today is I don't really buy what they're selling on it either, but I don't need it to be false for my for my Christian worldview to work. Whereas that's not that most Christians are absolutely reliant on a lot of these narratives being false, because if so, then it essentially in their mind disproves their faith.
Right. And I think that that's where covenant creation really helps so much,
Yeah.
because a lot of Christians will not, even if there was 100% evidence that the world was created 15 billion years ago, the earth has only existed for 4.7, they cannot deal with it, because their worldview, and especially within the last 200 years, last 100 years with fundamentalism, is that without Adam being the first biological human being, then you cannot convince people that they are sinners, right? But what covenant creation helps for people to see is that, no, there was sin in the world before Genesis 1. Romans 5:13 says that before the law was given, sin was in the world. People were sinful. People were killing each other. And that's what we see in archaeological records. People were living very, very violent lives. But when God breaks through about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago, it is in order to declare the light of the gospel. It is in order to begin to, sensitize people as to what sin is. And that's what he does with Adam, because God wanted to change humanity. Right? But God is a God of order. He begins with a people. He begins with a man. He begins with a community. And this news is supposed to spread gradually throughout history. And that's exactly what we see happening. And we see it accelerating, especially after Jesus comes and dies and resurrects. And he predicts that this mustard seed knowledge is going to spread throughout the world. And now we are in a world in the 21st century where almost everybody has heard about the God of the Bible. Almost everybody has heard about Jesus Christ, exactly what the Bible says. So to me, when people tell me, well, if Adam is not the first human being, then how can you preach to them about sin? And I was having a conversation with one of my opponents, and I told them, listen, I come from Africa. My people did not hear about Jesus Christ until 1844. But when the first missionaries came to my people in Kenya, they did not need to convince us that we were sinners. In our culture, we already have a recognition that people are evil, people are sinful, and that we need to do something about it. We already had protocols of discipline. We already had protocols of justice. So when they come to us and they tell us we have good news about how to deal with evil, we're not like, what is evil? We are not evil. No. We know evil. We are masters of iniquity. We are masters of evil. Same thing, if you go to the Amazon forest today, you don't need to convince those people who are enriched, or that there is murder, or that there is rape, or that there is lying or stealing. No, they know it. They see it in their community. So I don't need to convince them that they became sinners because they descended from Adam. Because they already know they are sinners before they know about Adam. No, what I need to convince them is, do you have a good solution for this? Do you have an eternal solution for this? Because I believe that every community believes, and at least my community believed, there was an afterlife. We believed that whatever a man did in this life was going to affect their position or their situation in the afterlife. So when the Christians come and they tell us, the God of the universe, the God who created everything, sent his only son, he died on the cross in order to make sure that you can obtain eternal life. We were like, tell us more about this. Because this is what we have been trying to figure out within our own systems. So I don't need everybody to come from Adam in order to deal with sin. What I need to know is, this God of the universe who created everything, what has he done, or what is he requiring? What way has he provided that we can follow and resolve this issue of sin?
I agree. I find, I'm the same as you. I don't think Adam was the first human. And that really rattles a lot of Christians. And I've heard the question, the same one, oh, well, if Adam's not the first human, then why do I need Jesus? Why you can? And I take the same view. I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, if you're not convinced, then maybe you're not.
Right.
Maybe, I don't think this is a theology issue for you. I think maybe you need to sort of look inside your own heart a little bit more.
I think it's an issue of, this is what somebody has been told. If you don't believe that Adam is the first human being, you cannot be a Christian. So therefore, when they hear you say, I don't believe Adam was the first human being on the earth, then Christianity becomes untenable for them. But it's the same thing like if you tell people Jesus is not coming back soon. The same, it's just like a futurist. You tell them Jesus is not coming back soon, then what hope is there? Well, then what is the point of it anyway? And you're like, really? So you believe that Jesus coming back in your future is what determines all of life? Right? But that's not what the Bible is teaching. The Bible is teaching that at some point of history, Jesus was going to come back. And when he came back, life was going to continue on the earth, but it was going to continue on the basis of his finished work. Right? So for me, hope is not taken away just because Jesus came back in my path. In the same way, sin does not go away just because I realize I don't belong to the line of Adam. No. I belong to a line of people who are sinners. And we need a resolution to evil. Jesus Christ is that solution. Because Adam doesn't save us. What I believe about Adam really does not change my pathway to salvation. So even if I was to say, I don't really believe Adam was a real human being. Let's say I believed he was an allegory. Nevertheless, the question is, do you believe that Jesus was a real human being? Do you believe Jesus died on the cross? That's what matters. Do you believe that Jesus provides a solution for anyone, anywhere, in any generation to come into relationship with God and to come into a place of obtaining righteousness? That's the core belief that every person who is a Christian needs to believe.
Agreed. What do you think the future path is for the Christian church, and then by extension the world now? And when I say future path, I'll keep you on your initial timeline as a futurist that was, looking at the world up until 2050. There's so many different narratives and storylines and weird things happening in the world now. I think we've got a whole lot of sort of counterfeit prophecy seems to be happening. The church is a mess in many ways. Society's in a mess in many ways. I think as a reflection on that, what's your sort of diagnosis?
Well, this is what I think. First of all, remember the concept that we said that the church is a real being, a real organism that's growing. So I believe that right now the church is a teenager. That's why I think there's all these hormonal, tantrums, and it looks like a mess. Just like you can remember when you were a teenager, things just look like a mess. You were clumsy. But I believe that the church is going to continue to grow and to mature. I believe that by about 2070, futurism, or at least pre-millennialism, will be dead. Because
all
the prophecies will have come to the place where they can no longer be sustained. Right? And so they will have to now go back to the drawing boards, and they will find that there are people who have already discovered that already took place. So, wise up and just believe the Bible for what it says. Jesus already came back. And since the Bible shows that the plan of God was gradually, in a very, very, very gradual, progressive way, to infiltrate the world with his kingdom, I believe that's going to continue for thousands upon thousands of years. And over time, the knowledge of God is going to impact the world in a very positive manner. But it's not going to all happen at once. I believe the way it's been happening is the way it's going to continue to happen. I believe that when you look at the world right now, even though it may feel like a mess, the world is way better than it used to be even 100 years ago, even 200 years ago. And I believe that Christianity has very much to do with that. Because you look at the most developed nations, the places where there's most healthcare is in the West. Is where the light of the gospel has been shining greatly. And yet we are just at the very beginning of this explosion of knowledge. So I believe that the world will gradually, continually become a better place as people have a better understanding of God and his plan to dwell with men in the visible world perpetually. Now, do I believe that the earth is always going to be here? No.
You read my mind. I was about to ask that question.
Right. I believe that just based on the laws of nature, the way God has set them up, I believe that solar system is going to collapse. And we can see that with other solar systems or other star systems in this galaxy and in other galaxies, eventually they run out of fuel, eventually they collapse. New star systems are always being made. I believe that humanity will be able to conquer space. I believe that humanity is going to move from this planet and from this solar system. It may take 1,000,000 years, but I believe that the thrust and the knowledge of humankind is going towards that direction. I believe that's God's will.
Yeah.
You know, I remember, I don't know if you ever watched that movie Contact from back in the day.
Nah.
And they were asking the question, well, if there's nobody out there in these whole galaxies and everything, then what a waste. And I don't believe it's a waste. I believe that God created it as it is, as a frontier for humankind to explore and to colonize and to occupy in the millions of years to come. And I believe that the faith of Jesus Christ is going to be spread throughout. Now, I know that's a personal opinion.
Yeah.
So in other words, when it says that the earth will never end in Ecclesiastes, one generation comes, another generation goes,
but the earth remains the same. Yeah.
I don't believe it's speaking about the planet Earth.
Yeah.
It's speaking about the land, which is really speaking about the people.
Is occupied by the people. Yeah.
Yes, God's people will always exist.
Yeah.
God's people are created to dwell in the visible world perpetually.
Yeah.
I don't believe that there will ever come a time when nobody is in the visible world or the visible world doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I believe that God intends for this to be here and for it to continue to be the domain of human beings.
Do you think, I mean, this is just purely speculation now, which is a bit of fun, you know. We spend so much time sort of trying to work out what passages say. We may as well be a little bit imaginative. We're in year 2025 now. In the year, 15,000, how do you think, is the world looking back at the story of the itinerant preacher Jesus of Nazareth in 15,000 years earlier as still relevant for them?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I really do believe that, because if Jesus is who he says he is,
he's timeless.
Jesus is God and Jesus came from heaven to reveal God, which I believe without a shadow of doubt that's one of the things I told you. I don't see that changing in my life. I believe that he will be even more significant. Because it is my belief that as the world goes and as the church goes, there will be a clearer and clearer understanding of what was meant in the scriptures. Just like right now, we look at the scriptures, we see all the interconnection of the scriptures, right? And as people, we have a clearer understanding of the gospel than, let's say, Martin Luther. And his generation. And so in the same way, I believe the people 500 years from now, they'll be looking at us and be like, you guys were just discovering that Jesus returned? I mean, that's basic. That's axiomatic. You should have known this. So I believe that as people go, there'll be more discoveries, even in archaeology. I believe that many writings that have been suppressed or that are not discovered, untranslated, will come to light. I think it's Gary DeMar who said that based on what is known, only about 10% of what was written by the church fathers has been translated or even discovered. Right? So in the next 500 years, I believe that much of that comes to light. And all of a sudden we realize, so there are so many more people in the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century that actually believed that Jesus already came back, but that information was suppressed. So I believe that the information gets clearer and clearer and clearer down the line, and the belief in Jesus Christ becomes even more solid. So I don't think they'll look back and say how primitive it was. They'll be like, wow, he came in when people were so closed, and it will even be more of a miracle to them based on how developed they will be. But of course, it could be that we are going to have another ice age and another catastrophic destruction of civilization, and then they'll have to start over again, so they'll be where we are. I don't know. But my hope is that things will only get better and better in terms of understanding what God has done, what God did through Jesus Christ, and why it has taken as long as it has for people to begin to come to an understanding of it.
I think patience and humility about how small our time on earth is in this far longer journey helps us to sort of work out these narratives and understand where it all goes.
Absolutely.
Steve, what's life been like since you came from Kenya to America?
Well, I came to the United States in 1999.
Yeah,
I first of all came to go to school, which I did and completed by 2004. And at the time, like I said, I was not really following in the pathway of seeking God.
yeah,
I was a lifer. I was a drunkard. I was clubbing. I was, what I felt was enjoying life.
yeah,
And so, but I also got married within 3 years of coming here. And that changed my life radically because now I have to begin to think about life. And my wife and I didn't know each other very well when we first got married. So the first five
yeah,
years of my life in America as a married person it was really bad because I was
yeah,
very narcissistic and I felt this marriage thing was cramping my style.
yeah,
So, and that is what actually led to the crisis to where we were like, something has to break. Either we have to figure this thing out or we need to go our separate ways.
yeah,
So in 2007, I came to faith in Christ. I became a transformed man. I stopped living the life I was living.
mm-hmm.
And I would say for me, as far as I can remember, when I look at my life, that's when my real life really began
Yeah,
in
yeah,
America.
yeah,
That's when purpose became clear to me. What was the purpose of my life? What was the purpose of my marriage? What was the purpose of my parenting? And of course, at the time, I felt in 2007, 2008, my purpose was to prepare my family for the soon coming of Jesus and the great tribulation. And so I really focused on God, and I really focused on learning and studying theology and studying the Bible and studying other worldviews and, you know, you know, being an apologetic kind of person. And so in 2019 was the next big shift, which when I discovered that Jesus already came back in our past and that this world is not going to end and that God's kingdom in this world is going to continue to be here. That
yeah,
changed my whole worldview. I look at the world so differently now. I love this earth. I love the people on this earth. I want I want this world to be conserved for the future. I want to leave a legacy for my children. I want to leave a legacy not only for my children, but for the people that are coming behind us. Now I find myself constantly sitting with my children and also with the church people and saying, we need to do something now that will impact people 500 years.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Whatever we believe, whatever we write, whatever, even the videos that I do all the time,
yeah,
I'll be honest with you, look, I'm always thinking 500 years from now, people are going to be watching this.
yeah.
A
Okay.
1,000 years from now, people are going to be. So that's always my view. I'm not just thinking of, I need to get likes and I need to get a following now.
Yeah,
That is important, but I don't think that's as important. I'm thinking, how can I impact this generation so that 10 generations down the line
mm,
or 5 generations down the line, it is actually making it clearer for them and better for them how to live and how to follow after God and how to seek after God and how to impact their fellow men for good, for love, for righteousness. So
yeah.
that's how my life has turned out to be, and I'm loving it.
Awesome. It's an extraordinary worldview.
Amen.
I've really appreciated you coming on, Steve, and sharing your story and hearing a little bit more about your backstory and how you think and how you've worked through these things. I've certainly been able to see a different side of you. Maybe just a final comment. You have spoken about, you just mentioned it then, looking sort of 500 years into the future. What's your real purpose right now moving forward?
I believe, just as it has always been, my real purpose is to serve God, to serve the glory of God, to be a vessel to reveal God to people,
Mm-hmm.
but more especially now to reveal the outworking of God's plan so
Yeah.
that people can understand what the plan was at the beginning, what the plan was in the middle section when Jesus came, what the plan was for the second coming, and what the plan is for the future.
Yeah.
Because I think that when people have a clearer map
Narrative. Yeah.
of what life is all about and where it's going, then it's easier to put your roots down. It's easier to lay a good foundation and to begin to live a life that is going to be significant not only in the present but for the future generations. Because for me, when I look at the way that I looked at the world before I discovered about the whole plan of God, it was very temporary. It was very self-centered. It was very selfish. It was all about here and now and me and escaping. It was escapism at its best. But now, by the grace of God, I think I have a clearer view of the map of eternity. That eternity is not just lived out in life after this one, but that eternity is lived out by the church here. So the church will
here
be
and
here
now
eternally, but at the same time, I believe in heaven. I believe that after this, I continue to be alive. So therefore, my purpose and my goal in life is not only to please God here and now, but also to be able to dwell with Him and to see how He works out the plan from the other side of heaven.
Awesome. Great story, Steve. Once again, really appreciate it. And in the show notes, I'll drop some links to all your content. And I hope people that are hearing about you for the first time can go and check that out. But there's probably over 1,000 videos, I think, aren't there? So
1,400 videos so far.
There's plenty to sink their teeth into.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, mate.
And look, I wanna thank you so much, even for taking the time to speak with me and to give me an opportunity to just express myself. I don't take it for granted. This is a great, great, great honor. And may God bless you and your ministry and your podcast. May everything that you do just be abundantly blessed.
Appreciate that, Steve. It's been my my absolute pleasure, and God bless you and your family too.
Thank you.
Thanks, my friend.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit like and subscribe to get notified when the next episode is live.